customer knowledge or understanding of the customer, financial skills, marketing skills, and then we had some comments below, which we'll scroll down. Customer knowledge came out far and away on top. I would imagine, Erica, you probably see kind of a culmination of skill sets. It's probably not just any one skill set for a CMO to have, but we'll dive into that in a moment. Here's some of these other areas. Market intimacy was a comment that was made. Leadership skills. There's all the above combination. I don't know, Megan, what was your thought on this poll?
Well, I understand, and I'm glad to see that people, want a CMO focused on customer knowledge. But the thing that sort of stood out to me is when you're hiring, and this maybe goes over to some of your expertise, Erica, but when you're hiring a CMO, they may not know your customer. So to me, it's actually something that CMO has to be very conscious of developing once they join a business. Sometimes you join a business that for which the customer, but other times maybe you're signing up for something completely different. And how do you acquire then that customer knowledge really quickly? Because one thing I've observed too is it's a quick way for any leader to lose credibility fast with a new team if they really don't speak the language of the customer of the company that they're going to. But again, kind of a chicken and egg problem, right? You're not there, so you don't know the customer. But how do you get to know them fast? So I would actually love to hear from you, Erica, a little bit about what you're seeing. That this is what sort of our crew of voters picked. But what kinds of skills are you seeing be really in demand from companies right now for their marketing leadership?
Well, I agree with you. First, thanks for having me on. This is fun. I agree with you on the customer piece. I think, what I'm increasingly seeing in B2B is an interest in CMOs having a general management toolkit. And people are talking about oh, I want the CMO a client just said the other day, he was interviewing a CMO who didn't know what contribution margin was. So they want people who have a sense of P&L, ideally they've led a P&L in the past. This has always been easier on the B2C side than B2B. But there's the customer knowledge piece is key. Industry experience is getting more and more important because I think marketing is occupying that greater strategic seat. So people will get a bit of I think your compensation will reflect whether you have industry experience or not. And it's so interesting, how do you acquire that customer knowledge? I think the best candidates will talk to people, do their own homework in the process of interviewing for a job and get to know the customers. So I did this search. I will never forget this. And I might have told this story at a previous setting, so some of you might have heard this, but I was doing this search for a cybersecurity company. And it was a really hard search. And we had these 3 finalists, finally put them in touch with the investors, a PE-backed company, as many of the companies I work with are. And the PE guy, who's kind of a toughie, he was like, okay, how many customers have you talked to? And none of the candidates had talked to any customers. And we had to restart the whole process and find new candidates. And we built it into the process and we gave them customers to talk to. But ideally, people are kind of, just like we do backdoor references on people and on companies, we should do that on, with customers as well.
Yeah, that's a great tip, actually. I'll look at G2, but I don't always actually call customers, right? Our other review sites, Glassdoor, also, those are all things that I think job seekers can benefit from. But that's a great idea. Curious, actually, folks on the line, who has called or spoken to a customer from a company that you've interviewed with? I'm just curious if you could do a hand raise, either actually or virtually. Anybody? Yes, John, you have. Yeah,
go, John.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Erica's, so that's why I'm joining today. For my latest job, CMO of TechTarget, interestingly, in order to provide, it wasn't as smart as Erica was describing, but in order to provide references, I was able to talk to customers of TechTarget because I had to provide references, and they happened to coincide because they were in the tech industry and TechTarget's in the tech industry. But I think it's really smart. I had never thought of looking out. The other thing that I did do that was really important is I talked to competitors. Mm-hmm. So that might be helpful as well. if you're looking for a job.
Yeah, definitely. Great tips. And and Erica, I think one of the things that you've talked about, and you'll see for folks in the chat, you'll see a link to an article in Forbes, and we'll apologize in advance for the bad experience on Forbes because they put so many pop-ups in front of you before you get to the article. But it's a really good article that Erica wrote maybe like a year ago on how to find product market fit for your CMO, which is super interesting. And I think it's a really good perspective. But sounds like one of the things you do when you're talking to companies about the kind of person they need, going back to your kind of counseling that, that CEO and thinking about what they need, but how do you help them identify the right fit, the right kind of person to be pursuing? Because I know sometimes people come in with a wish list and, if that person existed, like, man, I want to meet him,
Right. Exactly. Yeah. My joke is always like, they want it all, and they want it all on a shoestring. They want the CMO who can think like a CFO and who can rise to a CEO. They want, the person who knows brand and demand, ideally. And, I'm also increasingly seeing this, this idea of like putting the market into marketing. I mean, it kind of goes back to the customer and industry stuff, that we were talking about, but a lot of marketers, like if they're so focused on data and tech and just, making things run, they might forget about the market standpoint. So I did a search earlier this year, which was VP of Solutions Marketing, and it was all about that, like taking this GM view. And it was a company that was selling in multiple markets, so it made sense for them to kind of have a kind of Uber market manager, if you will. But a lot of what I do is helping companies sort out the trade-offs. So I can share something. Can I? Yes, I can. Go. Here we go. Yeah. So, I mean, of course, we could all put in, like, make these like great laundry lists of everything we're looking for. But where a search gets interesting is where there's trade-offs that come up, So for instance, you might want somebody that's great behind the scenes, working with data and, kind of like a data or a tech wonk. But then a company often also wants that person to be an evangelist and be like comfortable in front of a room. For instance, they might, we were talking about this earlier, scrappy versus scale. You often have a company that, like in my world, it's like, companies, whatever, 50 million, they want to get from 50 million to 200 million. Okay, well then you want the person who's going to be scrappy enough at 50 million, but then able to scale, like, or do you just go for the person who's already operating at that $200 million level of revenue and come in? But then the question is like, oh, are they going to be scrappy enough? And this is where companies can really get wrapped around the axle with what do we want. And this is where searches can take a while. And I think, I guess from the candidate side, just being aware of the difficulty that is going on the other side of the table. Candidates love it if a company is clear with what they want and focused, but sometimes they're really figuring it out as they go and grappling with some of this stuff. Any does this resonate, or any kind of feedback on this?
Yeah, any questions from folks on the line? Feel free to jump in.
I guess, Erica, I got a question in terms of I love this framework, by the way, and I could totally appreciate kind of the evolution of searches and CMOs going through searches. How have you seen things change with COVID, pre-COVID and now post-COVID on the search? Has anything changed? Is the framework relatively the same? Are people looking for the same skill sets, or is there even more of a premium toward digital than maybe before? Or is that just a function of, hey, we're a lot more digital today than we were 10 years ago? What are you seeing trend-wise there?
I'm seeing a lot of conversations about how CMOs have switched their teams and kind of retrained their teams to accommodate for, more digital forward, ways of, it's not just running events, but just, in general. I think there's also just, with COVID, there's this, it's harder to get the cultural fit right. And so like, hiring somebody on Zoom, plenty of people do it, but, so if you can find ways to kind of share your culture with people ahead of time, like invite a candidate to be on a call, like even if it's like a kind of like an update call, a social call, whatever it is. but give them that opportunity. That's really helpful. The other thing I could call out is like this career stage versus life stage. Often people want like that, 30, 35-year-old, up and coming natively digital person, but that person can be sometimes very focused on, like, especially in COVID, like young kids at home, and they might not be willing to, they might not be in the headspace to take on another job. So I've seen that. I've also seen like, I think like, the rise of like the COVID job, and we read about the Great Resignation. I'm seeing companies that are, hiring talent, and then people will stay there for like a very short amount of time, and then they realize, oh, that wasn't the right fit, or oh, I was too rash in taking that job. So surprisingly, I see people who are willing to move after 5 months in a job. So it's not necessarily around skill sets, although that you're right on the more data forward stuff. And being able to build a team in a tight talent market is just another skill that people are looking for in many cases.
You've got straight edged versus jagged edged career. Say more about what that means.
Yeah, so a straight edge career might be somebody who, they start as a marketing assistant, and then they become a marketing manager, and then they become a marketing director, and then a marketing VP. And maybe these are all, say, B2B SaaS companies in the MarTech space. That is a totally understandable career path, and one that it just makes sense. And often those are people who get interviewed because it's like, oh, wow, this makes sense. Because a lot of times the CEO is looking for somebody to, to just feel comfortable to them, and they can get scared. It's not just with marketers, but they can get scared if there are too many jagged edges. And what I mean by jagged edges, it could be like, if you just can't understand why somebody has made the move from X to Y to Z, but I placed this guy once who had been like he had a gap in his resume. I said, what were you, what was going on then? He said, oh, I was in a band, and I was like, traveling around, and, and it actually, I mean, he was actually a cool guy. And so I think he had jagged and then straight. But the biggest thing that companies hiccup on is short tenure. So the big thing as a company, if you're looking at a candidate that has short tenures, and this is a big thing in marketing, it's a big thing in general, but just make sure you understand and just ask the candidate to kind of walk through that. And then from the candidate side, I always advise people to just explain why you left a company. Like, put it in your LinkedIn profile, put it on your resume, so that, or if it's 6 months, take it off your damn resume, just because people get so stuck on that, and they're afraid that you're going to leave them. So that's what I mean. It could be short paths, or it could be it could be also just weird, like, oh, you were in marketing, and then you were in customer success, and then you were this or that. And sometimes that can all come together nicely, depending on the storytelling and the marketing of the marketer.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, I would love to hear too from you. We're talking about sort of what companies are looking for, but as you said, it's a tight talent market right now, and many people are hiring. What are candidates looking for? Like, what kinds of cultural, attributes are they looking for? What kinds of, roles are they looking for? Anything in particular that you could say, for people on this line too, who may be hiring, what would you advise them to feature?
Yeah, I talk to people who have a framework, and it's impressive, because I never had a framework when I was like coming up in my career, and I wish I had. But often it's like, they want a good product, a good team, good leadership, good culture, good differentiation, and ideally a good challenge to go along with it. And focus. That, I mean, not everybody says all of these things, but those are some of the things that candidates are looking for. And there's also, I think they want the understanding that marketing is not just a lead machine. I heard this thing recently, and it was like, people often say, I want the CMO who has a demand gen oriented background, but which is fine. And there's many of those that are great, but if you only focus on the demand piece, that might be the only thing you get. If you only focus on the brand piece, that might be the only thing that you get. So I think candidates want people who want jobs where marketing is going to be a nice, robust, function, and where they're not, managing uphill, the whole time. But I mean, that's what I'm seeing. I'm curious to see from others, if you want to kind of jump into jump out or into the comments, or, live, if there's anything that I've left off in that.
Yeah, the people that either you're talking to, or as you think about your current or future roles, what things are you looking for? Would love to see that. Feel free to jump in or put it in chat too.
I mean, did you have a framework, Megan, John, like when you guys were, like in, coming up in your careers for evaluating things?
I wish I could say yes, but no. I mean, I have to say I'm probably the definition of your jagged edged career too. I mean, it was kind of whatever I was in the mood for at that point in my life, I guess. Right?
I almost found it a process of trial and error. Now it's been a while since I've been on the corporate side, but it's a process of trial and error of you almost have to talk to a number of companies, quite frankly, to find the opportunity. And I lived in Silicon Valley as well as the East Coast. So that's my perspective, my experience of out there. It's almost a sport to interview, believe it or not. Whereas out here, it's much different. So it's a much different kind of pace and cultural acceptance of that level of interviewing. But out there, you had to interview with, you had to kiss a lot of frogs to get the prince. So in some cases it worked, in some cases it didn't.
It's so true. It's different to interview, to recruit in Bay Area versus East Coast, especially like New York. Like New York is very transactional. People, it's like, okay, I'll meet you at 11:12 until 11:20 and we'll talk very quickly. And in the Bay Area, you have people who are willing to take a flyer, like, hey, sure, I'll get together, let's have coffee tomorrow, and it's a very different kind of culture and, approach to hiring. And I think there is that, you bring it up, this, you have to meet people to figure out what you want. But you also don't want to be figuring things out too much on other people's dimes and times, because the candidates that are most memorable are usually the ones who know what they want and have a focus and, can kind of sift through the opportunities and hone in on what makes sense for them, and not use the interview as a way of like figuring themselves out, which is something I used to do. So.
Yeah,
I can make a suggestion to everybody. If you have an opportunity, maybe it's not still done this way, but if you have an opportunity to interview at Microsoft, it's really a really interesting experience.
How's that?
It's like all day. It's like 6 or 7 people in a row, and then I've never been offered a job, but so I guess I failed twice. But supposedly you get offered the job by the last person if they want you.
Wow.
And so it's really hard. And if you can make it through that, you could teach a lot of us, or you could teach people a lot about this. The other thing I wanted to ask you, Erica, you said you do a lot of hiring for PE firms. I've personally had really negative experiences working within companies that have been acquired by PE firms. So I wondered if you could say something about why it would be positive to go work for a company that was owned by private equity.
Interesting. So often I work with companies that are PE backed, and sometimes I'm working directly with PE folks, and sometimes the PE folks are around but not directly involved in the search. But to answer your question, I thought that I just finished up one, and I asked the CEO that. I said, like, why should somebody want to do a PE backed company versus a venture backed? Because in venture backed, you could be great focus on growth. You don't have to worry as much about profitability. Oftentimes you can kind of buy yourself into a market, versus PE, where this, so much of a do more with less. And he was just like, look, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. We have a goal, and we're trying to kind of have an end result, get bought, whatever it is. And that's very, he was just very practical about it. There was going to be a, wealth creation opportunity at the end. And that it wouldn't last forever. Like that's the thing with a venture backed company, it might be earlier stage, and maybe, you're there for 10 years before, it goes kaboom. I would say the network of a PE backed company, often, they'll have all their CMOs from all their portfolio companies come together. And so you can learn from those people. And they have often, increasingly they're trying to differentiate beyond just, our money is green. And they are bringing in, go-to-market experts internally, and that are, farmed out to various companies. And so I would say, your skills can get better as a result, because you have, those kinds of resources and people who have worked in these kind of diligent environments before. Obviously there's personalities at play, as well. So, your mileage may vary depending on the company. But yeah. Any other thoughts? It's a really interesting question.
Yeah, well, so I think you said something that was really interesting. There might be some relationship to where you are in your career. So in my career, I could see doing it because I might not want to stay at a place very long. But if you're trying to avoid a jagged edged career thing, trying to explain why you went to work for a company that was looking to, I don't know, go public again or to sell within 3 years, is the tasks for the marketer seem very different from the tasks that we traditionally ask marketers for, which are sort of a growth orientation, a spending for the future kind of perspective. And in my experience with PE firms, I've always had my marketing budget slashed and my headcount slashed. So I was much more of a financial manager, which is a useful skill, but it's not marketing. I mean, marketing in an environment of extreme resource constraint, I guess you could call that marketing, but it's not been the joyous celebration of communicating that I'd want in the sort of power period of my career growth.
Interesting. Yeah. And, there's firms that focus on growth equity and firms that don't as, it's more like the slashing, kind of thing. And I've always worked with the ones that are more growth oriented and, early on in the whole period, where there's the long-term perspective is like, okay, if they're going to sell in 5 years, well, that's plenty long, to have kind of a blend of short-term and long-term.
So that's a great point. Look at what type of PE firm it is.
Yeah.
And understand how their strategy will play out.
And where they are in the hold period and how they view marketing. And also, is it a CRO that a marketing person is reporting to, or a CEO, right? Because that's kind of like the trend. Sometimes you're marketing reporting to a CRO, for better or for worse.
How about skills wise, in terms of, everybody on this call may aspire to become a CMO, and there may be certain skills that are valuable leading up to that process. Do you suggest kind of mid-career people get broader or focus in on any one area? I know sometimes we even get carried away with talking about our own type of language internal to marketing. How does that translate? Like what advice would you give on all of that for a mid-career person?
Yeah, I mean, well, I can't really say what it's interesting. Should you go broad or deep? I don't know. My gut says, if you're, it's like, don't look backward, you're not going that way, and so if you're looking forward and the role of the CMO is broader, make sure that you are able to be that, like that T-shaped marketer. I think the other thing is being able to speak PE. I had a client who said that, like, oh, I love this candidate, Erica. He can speak PE to me. And that was great. And also realize that as you evolve from the head of, say, customer marketing or product marketing or brand marketing or demand gen to the leader of all of marketing, then you're going to go from reporting to a CMO to reporting to a CEO. And you just plain talk to a CEO differently than you talk to a CMO. Like, you do have to kind of get rid of the lingo as you talk to a CEO and boil it down into what they care about. And they, I mean, God bless them, they're not experts on anything. Like, I used to have this career coach who was this retired CEO of the Visiting Nurses Association. He was like, it's a good thing, like I'm the CEO, because I'm not a nurse, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an accountant, I couldn't do any of these jobs. And like, I mean, so I mean, that's kind of where a CEO can be coming from, and realize that they're not going to be as much of a marketing expert unless they come from marketing, and that's its own thing.
Well, plus everybody thinks they're in marketing, even if they're not. So
100%.
really, it doesn't matter if you
Yeah.
But I'm curious who, it looks like I just saw you join us on video. Hello. I'm guessing maybe you have a question. Anything you'd like to?
I do. And I've been working with John for a couple of years, and John's been seeing us at One Door go from kind of like a demand gen to an ABM. And the question I have, and I feel like it's a lot of conversations internally, is trying to explain to your C-level team the differences between when you really move to ABM, what does that really mean and how that translates? Because you start reporting out on different metrics, and the things that used to take for granted, page views and lots of leads and things that were always unqualified, but the numbers looked good. It's a different kind of mindset with ABM. So my question is, are you finding a lot of, CEOs that are understanding ABM, and that there's a different kind of mind shift that a marketing team is taken with that when they're trying to explain kind of the value that you're bringing to the company as ABM as a new discipline?
Yeah. Well, I'll share my thing, and then others might have other input. But again, a CEO might not be, they might use the term ABM without really truly understanding what it means. And so one thing that it means is marketing and sales working closely together. Another thing is obviously, the metrics are different, right? And they might not know. They just might want, a candidate to say, I do account-based marketing, and to check a box, I mean, hopefully they'll, delve more into it. But I think you're right that maybe there's an education piece. And maybe it's a simple, from to kind of matrix, like, we're like on the left, you have, what the old metrics were, and the pros and the cons. And on the right, you have like the account-based world and how that's different. If you could boil that down, that just occurs to me as something that might resonate with a CEO. Other thoughts?
So
you're probably right in that it's a buzzword. And, I think for the CEO, it's really what a CEO would respond to is, oh, my marketing team's being more targeted in the approach to marketing, and hopefully cutting out the waste. But understanding like exactly what ABM is, I think it's kind of a loaded term even for marketers, to really understand what does that mean.
Yeah, I agree with Linda completely. I think if the CEO is not using the term, if she is using the term, you have to figure out what she means. If she's not using it, don't use it. Use other terms like sales enablement, customer marketing, things like that.
So one question that I would have on this, kind of like setting expectations on the for the CEO and for other people in the C-suite, is like, if you're used to this traditional demand generation where you have the MQLs, and there's that expectation, there's so much expectation of being able to deliver the volume and making sure that they're turning into revenue quickly. And then if you're shifting into an account-based strategy, where it's less of that traditional demand gen MQL kind of style, if the expectation is still set on that traditional MQL delivery, then it's going to be viewed as a failure, because it's like, hey, where are all these leads? I thought we're going to get all this volume. So there's a shift in mindset that has to happen. There's a shift in expectations, and like even just trying to get this thing off the ground, starting up, it's like, I don't know if we could do that because we're being measured on these MQLs. So there's friction internally, even the idea of trying to pilot, because it's like, but the executives expect us to hit these benchmarks on the volume. What are your thoughts on like how to shift those expectations so that if you don't see those immediate returns, then it's like, okay, well, this is not a failure. It's just part of this new strategy. Like how do you go about shifting those expectations?
Yeah,
I think
I could.
Go ahead. Go ahead,
Yeah, I was
John.
gonna. No, go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to offer. Joe brings up a great point, and we see this time and time again. Of CEOs just don't have C-level executives, not just CEOs. Non-marketing C-level executives have zero patience for the amount of time and energy it takes to do account-based marketing successfully. One way we get around that is we spend a lot of time investing in a maturity curve of different areas of the business to say, you are here, and here are the steps that you need to take to get to that next level. And when they see that laid out in a one-page visual roadmap, and sometimes the baby's ugly, but it clearly spells out where they are to where they need to be, because the executives only see the very top end. And guess what? I was an executive. I was guilty of that too. They only see, hey, I want the very top. They don't understand that there's a hell of a lot of work that goes into creating that top level account-based approach. So that's one way that we've gone about doing that, Joe. And Ken, we can offline, I can share, obviously, given our relationship, I can certainly share some experiences there. But it's not easy. It is totally not easy. Erica, you were saying something before I jumped in and stepped on you by accident.
No. I'm wondering if you have both. You could say like, look, I could do both. There's like the traditional demand gen oriented approach. And I would say it's not even traditional, because a lot of companies don't even have their demand gen, kind of high volume machine as evolved as they want it to be. So I'm almost picturing like two slides. It's like there's the quality slide and the quantity slide that you show to CEO. And it's like, okay, I could be, or it's like, eating dinner at, a famous steakhouse versus, McDonald's, and, and having some kind of metaphor and, reporting on both and communicating that, one can, starve the other unless you have unlimited resources. But, if you can kind of make progress on both, that, maybe there's something there.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Your analogy, just to continue that, and maybe the McDonald's meal doesn't fill you up. It's not quality,
right?
Because the lead mentality. I think for too long, marketers bragged about how many leads, and they weren't really pressed on, well, what did that convert to? What was the quality of those leads? So it is a completely different language, account based, and what we're trying to measure and what the goal is.
And I just put a note in chat too. To me, this is a real opportunity to use stories to describe what you've seen in other companies, especially if there are other companies you've worked in. And I can see this working well in the interview process too. Well, let me tell you about a time where I saw this when I worked here, or, I think this is a great place to use real world examples to say, but with a purpose in mind of saying, and here's where they got. You can even lead with the end, right? Hey, we saw, revenues increase by 5%, but it took a year and a half. And that's because our sales cycle is 16 months. So we were able to accelerate some deals, but also we had to be patient. And some that we put in the top of the funnel, took our usual amount of time to close. Other things where you just kind of go back, you back into what it took to get to that kind of great result that either you saw or you've seen others achieve. But I'm also a big fan of setting up dashboards that show you leading and lagging indicators, right? Like revenue, customer expansion, all that stuff. That's all lagging indicators, but there are plenty of leading indicators that show you you're making progress towards that or not, right? So by setting up that kind of leading and lagging view, what am I going to see in a week? What am I going to see in 3 months? What am I going to see in a year? What am I going to see in 6 months, right? But just parsing out your metrics to say, I'm going to be able to tell you this story right away, but it's going to take a little bit longer to get to the end. But if you can provide rational reasons for why that's so, and then provide, sort of guideposts along the way to say we're tracking or we're not, and here's why, then you can win.
I love that. And especially looking into like qualitative feedback after they close, then you can get that, like if you have like a post-close interview, like, hey, let's take you out to lunch for 15 minutes. Tell me, like, how did you end up actually closing? And then that qualitative feedback can be the story that you bring. It's like, yes, they didn't close for 12 months, but here's what the journey looked like. And no, we can't track it quantitatively. We can't attribute this to a pay-per-click ad, but here's what the customer actually told us what happened.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's great. And those close stories also, if it's a great win, that can turn into a customer advocacy opportunity for them to talk about how they made their decision, and you can capture that and share that with other customers to sort of help them on their journey. But as you said, I think a lot of times executives have recency bias. So if you can put stories in front of them, even if they are qualitative, sometimes that's enough, right?
Yeah. I think what I'm taking away is language really matters on anything here, whether you're interviewing or change management, you're speaking PE, you're speaking CEO, you've got to adjust the language in each of these situations. And it's not hey, bring ABM to each one of these conversations. It's really understanding who that other person is and speaking in their language if you're going to succeed in any kind of change management.
Hey, a last question for Erica before we go. I know we're a little bit past time, but you're such a fun guest. Of course, we want to stay longer. What is a favorite interview question? Either that companies ask or that candidates could ask, like something that you think is a great question that gets interesting and telling answers.
I asked somebody today, what is a misperception that people have of you? And she liked that question. I also often ask, like, what are the values you grew up with? To kind of get somebody talking more personally. And and sometimes people don't need people. Sometimes people are comfortable. They're very disclosing, but sometimes they're not. And so I like those two because they're a little disarming. And one thing I hear from candidates that I really like is, tell me about my candidacy and the perceived gaps in my candidacy and what you like about me, right? Because then it helps them to be prepared to move on and talk to whoever the next person is that they're interviewing with.
That's a great one. Just get the company to tell you how you're doing, right? Don't wonder, just ask.
Yeah, exactly. And you could clear up any challenges. So it's like, you're kind of saying like, hey, what's your scorecard? Where am I low on the scorecard? And then, and I've had people ask me that, and then I feed back to them, and then they can clarify sometimes, because sometimes there's something that can get lost in translation.
Yeah. There you go, John Steiner. That could have been a great one for your day at Microsoft to find out how things were going.
Or a couple days. It sounds like he's had a couple shots on goal there. Yeah. So got to kiss a lot of frogs. Excellent. Looks like we're at time here. So next Friday, first of all, thank you, Erica, for investing time coming out today and spending it with us. A ton of lessons learned here. Next week, we've got a mystery guest. We had a last minute cancellation, so we'll be announcing that shortly. So stay tuned, but same time, same location. I don't know, Megan, any closing thoughts here?
No, just thank you so much, Erica. And thank you so much to everybody for joining us and for hanging out a little longer than usual too. I know it was a great opportunity to hear from a great speaker. So many, many thanks, Erica.
Thank you both. This is fun. Take care.
All right. And happy Friday to everybody.